Thanks for tuning in. I was reading in Romans and read this section in chapter 10, and it's quite a long passage for me to handle in one devotional. So I'm going to go quick, but I just wanted to encourage you and remind you that the offer of salvation is open for all who will receive it. In this section of Romans, Paul was really speaking about the Jews in contrast to the Gentiles. The Jewish people of that time had misunderstood the intent of the law. And so they set about trying to earn their salvation and develop a righteousness based on what they did or what they didn't do. And they looked at the Gentiles as, separate from the opportunity of salvation. And so in Romans 10, Paul begins in verse 1. He says, "Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." You see, I guess there's something in man that wants to attribute to themselves a goodness of their own. And the Jewish people and many religious people who are not Jewish even today, they might say they have a zeal for God, but a zeal for God is not what gives us righteousness. Because they had a zeal, but not according to knowledge. They were, he says, ignorant. Doesn't mean they were dumb. It means they lacked the knowledge or understanding of the righteousness of God. And you see, being right with God, being in right standing with God, isn't what we do or how we perform. It's not our good behavior as opposed to bad behavior. Our being in right standing with God, God's method to bring us into right standing is to entrust ourselves to his finished work. To recognize that through his death, burial, and resurrection, his perfect sacrifice, when we entrust ourselves to that, to him, we receive righteousness. Righteousness is not a work that we achieve, but a gift that we receive. And so this is the way of righteousness for God. So when a religious person sets out to stay right with God or to get right with God, because I've heard this terminology through the years, and appeals for people to come forward and get right with God. But most of their time, they're talking to believers. Get right, because maybe there's an attitude or an action that does not conform to who God's made them to be. But he's saying, no, recognize that he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Have you entrusted yourself to that righteousness? Or are you trying to seek to establish your own? Because Paul says we are called to submit to God's righteousness. Because Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. The purpose of the law was not to make you right with God. The purpose of the law was to show you the absolute perfection of God and your inability to meet that standard on your own. And so he calls you to believe, to entrust yourself, and let Christ be the end of the law. Let Christ, who lives in you, who died for you and as you so he could live in you, let him be the end of the rules and the regulations and the methodologies for being right and staying right. And trust yourself to his perfect sacrifice. and let that righteousness be reflected in the way that you live. He goes on in verse 5, he says, for Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. Well, therein lies the problem. No one keeps all of the commandments perfectly, but the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. The word of faith that we proclaim is that Jesus is more than enough. The word of faith is not some kind of thing that we make up, positive confession. The word of faith is us simply saying that we believe, we entrust ourselves to what he has done. We have faith, not in ourselves or our good works, but faith in his perfect word. So he says, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now that's good news. To confess is to agree with him. So you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. You see, there is no salvation that doesn't assume the lordship of Christ. There's a lot of people out there trying to sell people a ticket to heaven based on a prayer they prayed, but they have no intention of living as though Jesus is Lord. But none of the scripture assumes anything less than to entrust yourself to him is to assume that you will live under his rule and reign in your life. And so, confess and believe in your heart that he died, that he rose. He goes, you're saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, made just and whole. And with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. You don't have to worry about going to heaven when you die if you put your trust in him. But don't wait to die to go to heaven. Live every day, remembering the word is near. The living word is in you. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. No Jew, no Gentile, no male, no female, no one race over another. He says, it is all who come and recognize that he is Lord, that there is one authority, one who has the right to rule and reign over their lives. And we place ourselves under his authority. We recognize his perfect sacrifices and we trust it. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. I hope that you have that deep confidence, that you have recognized his sacrifice is all you need, and you've entrusted, you've confessed with your mouth, you've believed in the heart that he is Lord and reigns over you. So there is no reason to doubt. Well, I went a little longer than normal, but God bless you. Be encouraged. He loves you. Entrust yourself to him alone. Have a great day.